Hello, welcome back. Today I'm going to show you guys how to remove the primary drive from a 1988 Sportster. So this nut that goes onto the pull rod that releases the clutch fits nicely into a 1/2 inch drive socket. So you can use that to compress the clutch. This socket I have is a 32 millimeter, which is a little bit too small to actually do this, but I'm just doing it to kind of show you how it would work. So once everything's tight, then you can start prying on the snap ring with a screwdriver or something. There aren't ends with holes in them like snap rings often have, so you can't use snap ring pliers, you just have to pry it out of there. But it's not under a lot of tension either, so it'll come out eventually. You can see there I've got one side of it. Once you got that much, you can work the rest of it. If you're rough with it, you can sort of gouge the aluminum that it sits against. I didn't want to do that. If you take your time, it'll come right out for you. And you can see there's like a couple of rings there. Yeah, you can see which one fits where. The inner one has like a concave and a convex side. The concave side sits out towards the other ring. Um, Here I'm just going to take my socket off again. And now the clutch comes apart. You can see it's all pretty straightforward. Now the clutch plates just come right out. Um, well, they can be a little bit stuck, as you can see here. It's not actually just coming right out. The oil is kind of sticky, and these have been sitting for who knows how many years. But um, yeah, that's how you take them out. They're not held in with anything else at this point. And but I'm just gonna pop them back in there for now because they fit really well in there. So why not leave them be for now? Next, I'm going to show you how to take the nut off of the crankshaft. That can be a little bit tricky to get off. It's held on pretty tight to about 250 foot-pounds or so. And I don't have a breaker bar, but I got this torque wrench, which good enough in my book. And since this motor is already somewhat taken apart, and more crucially out of the bike, it's a little bit of a unknown to me as I'm starting this how I'm going to get that nut off there, especially since I don't have an impact. So I've got to figure out some way to keep the sprocket and the crankshaft from turning while I take the nut off. So anyway, I've figured out some good ways of doing this, and I'll show you some ways that also didn't work. It was a bit of a process to get that nut off of there, but with some perseverance, came off in the end. And here we go. I've moved the camera down to a better angle so you can see what I'm doing down there on the floor. Got the engine propped up on a dolly and sitting on top of a shipping blanket. so that I don't ding it up by yanking it around on the concrete floor. This oily rag technique probably would have worked to jam everything, but I didn't realize that you gotta feed whatever you're jamming in there in kind of slowly and ramp it in. Otherwise, the compression of whatever you're shoving in there is gonna cause a sort of a bounce, and it's just not gonna be able to keep everything locked in enough. So here I'm trying to see what I can do with the stock tensioner. It seems like a good idea to me when I'm doing this, but find out later it's not the way to go. I am on the right track here by putting the oily paper into the big side. It's a lot easier to feed stuff in on the bigger sprocket. You can see there I've got it fed in pretty good. To be honest, if I'd kept going on this one, I might have actually been able to get it. But I think I overdid it at some point, either feeding in too much or being kind of silly with what I'm doing. Hey, there I go, that's silly. Why am I feeding it in on the crank side? I should be feeding that in on the clutch side. That'll give me a lot more resistance and less bouncing action. You can see there it's kind of locked, but there's so much bounce that I can't really get that like hard push on it that you need to break the nut free. It's especially tricky with the engine all like loosey-goosey flopping around on the floor. It's kind of hard to hold it steady while you're putting 250 foot-pounds on it. Also, this is a torque wrench, and normally you don't use torque wrench with your feet, but figured I'd just give it a whirl. What I was gonna say is you don't use torque wrenches to take off just a random nut like this normally, as you probably know. But I don't have a breaker bar, so torque wrench it is. Yeah. Here I'm wandering around, um, trying to figure out something to put on the end of the torque wrench to get better leverage. Unfortunately, I don't have anything. Kicking it, not so good. It's too bouncy. If you did have a long bar to put on the end of the wrench, or the breaker bar ideally, that would probably do you good. For this next section, I'm just going to speed it up so you can get a quick overview of all the different things that I tried that didn't work, so that you can learn from my learning process, and then we'll get to the solution that I ended up with. So I decided to take a break and see if I could take the clutch off of the input shaft to allow me to get the chain off without undoing the crank sprocket nut. So there's a circlip inside of there that you've got to get out. And I didn't bring any circlip pliers with me from America, so I'm trying to make it work with some screwdrivers and a pick. I'll speed this section up too because it's a whole lot of fiddling and trying, and in the end I went and bought some circlip pliers, which you can see right here. Went to a super dope hardware store nearby, picked up these cool snap ring pliers. Gonna put them to work right away. Hopefully they do the trick. Yeah. Made in Taiwan for the win. Quality actually seems super awesome. The string's nice. The spring is nice and tight. Steel is obviously wicked hard. It's got that sort of like high-pitched click to it when it snaps shut. I'm into it. Awesome. I realized that propping up the engine on that little dolly was not very stable, and I had some plywood, so I put that on the edge of the engine so that I can sort of use that as a lip to support the engine while I'm trying to heave on it. So I remembered that I have a pin wrench. Maybe that's going to help me here because there are these two holes in the crank pulley. The holes are threaded though, so I don't really want to just stick the pins of the pin wrench right into the threads of the holes. But it occurred to me that maybe the thread is the same on the sprocket and on the tool, which would allow me to just take a bolt and thread it through the tool into the sprocket. Didn't work out, but it would have been awesome. Since the sprocket is like super hard steel, I figured I might as well just try putting pins into those threaded holes and, just being careful with it. Those threaded holes aren't really used for anything, although I don't want to mess them up, In the end, this was a total bust because the pin wrench is just not very long and it's really hard to get any torque on that. And then I don't have a hand free to hold the engine from just flopping over. So yeah, you can basically just go ahead and not do this. Here I am taking the clutch plates out just to have them out of the way now that I prepared a place to put them. So, did something cool. Jammed a bunch of leather in the chain, and that got it tight enough. I think the bolt will just come right off. Okay, cool. Didn't take much to get out of there. I was worried that it would be stuck in there. No, so that's good. That is pretty well poked into, but held awesome once I got it up in there. Now the bolt just comes right out. And now I'm pulling off the clutch and the crank pulley. It's a little bit of fiddling to get it off the stator because the magnets want to hold it in place, but it's really not that bad. Then the stator comes out with some T27 Torx and some prying to get the rubber stopper out of the back there. And that's a wrap.